Good afternoon and welcome to the Rotary Club of Madison. I'm George Hidalgo, Club President, and thank you for joining us. So my opening message today is about our club strategic plan. Always open up every meeting with some positive affirmation, talking about the great things that we're doing as a club. So I want you to go ahead and take a look at the screen, and you'll see the strategic plan summary for 2021 and 2023 that our board approved at their meeting Monday night. Now, this COVID-19 pandemic has challenged our members and our Rotary Club, and the Board of Directors and the Strategic Planning Committee has met repeatedly to establish sound direction for the club for the long term. And this single page is the starting point for strategic objectives that will be developed by committees over the next several months. So it's important that you understand that with the pandemic, our club is looking at the entire picture, the entire direction for our organization. Now, our board also has 3 task forces that will be reviewing governance and membership topics, and these task forces will report to the board in March. Now, we want to leave our 170-year-old Rotary Club even stronger for those who follow us. And thank you to this year's leaders for helping to keep us focused and moving forward. So let's direct our attention to the opening music. Elaine Mishler will play My Country 'Tis of Thee today. So we have a new member joining our Rotary Club today. Tom Merfeld has been loaned the classification Community Services and is the interim CEO of Catholic Charities of Madison. He was born in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and now makes his home on Edenberry Street in Fitchburg with his wife, Ann. They have 4 grown children. Now, Tom holds a bachelor's BBA degree in economics and a master's degree in theology from the University of Iowa. He attended Marquette University, where he earned his PhD degree in theology. Tom also holds an MBA degree in finance from Rockhurst University. He is a certified financial analyst and a certified public accountant. Now, Tom served as a member of the National Cooperative Business Association's Equity Fund Development Task Force and as a member of the American Academy of Actuaries Task Force on fair valuation of life insurance. Tom is a board member of SSM Health, and he enjoys golf, hiking, biking, and reading. Tom's sponsor is Ron Luskin, and please join me in welcoming Tom Merfeld into our Rotary Club. So our Community Grants Committee is chaired by Ellsworth Brown, and he has an update for us.
Good afternoon. I think you probably all know the poem, The Road Less Traveled by Robert Frost. It ends, and I took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. The genius of that poem is that Robert Frost never ascribes value to the choice of the road. He doesn't say whether it's good or bad. He leaves that up to each individual. And for most of us, it was probably a good choice if it's one we made. For others, however, it might not be a good choice. He was asked in his later years he is a poet, America's laureate poet, had learned about life. And he said, I can answer that question in 3 words. It goes on. It goes on. And it goes on for those of us who made the right choice on the road we took. It goes on for those whose choice was less fortunate. people who are not dealing as well with this pandemic as we might be. And it reminds me of what the people during the Great Depression might have thought historians would say about them. We know now, but they didn't. I think they were mostly concerned with finding food for their kids, shelter, money for rent, medical care, and that's the same thing today. Last week, I mentioned that of the 44 grants we made in the community grant campaign, 22 of them explicitly dealt with food, medical care, or shelter, and virtually all of them dealt with the needs of families and kids. One of the most profound economic and medical crises this country has ever faced is the one we're in right now. And the historians will judge this and us as well sometime in the future. But for now, the concerns of those who have food and shelter and medical care need to be for those who haven't. That's what our campaign is about. That's what the applications will deal with as we look at them in the coming months in order to make the grants next March for the 21-22 fiscal year, as Jen had talked about a couple of weeks ago. So that brings us to where we are in this campaign. I'm proud to say that we are doing extremely well, but I also want to tell you that I should address the 187 of you who have yet to make your gift. I understand that many of you may want to wait until the next tax year. That's why we're extending this campaign until the middle of January. And at the same time, 187 gifts are outstanding. If we simply receive the same amount of money from each of the people who gave last year, we will be another $38,000 ahead. That's how much money is on the table right now. And that's how much money we need to make this organization whole in the kind of grants we have to give to help people who need food, shelter, and medical care and can't afford it. So please, when you go home, write that check if you're not waiting for the 2021 fiscal year. And send it in or call Pat and give her your credit card number. I know you will do it. I have a tremendous amount of confidence in my fellow Rotarians, all of you. And thank you, those of you who have given. Thank you as well for those of you who will. And by the way, a special thanks to Mary O'Brien. What a wonderful surprise, Mary. Last week, when you said you'll match $10 per gift for everyone who sends one in, we'll have a tally waiting for the mails to finish deliveries, of course, next week of the difference that made. And we deeply appreciate that. Wonderful surprise. So for all of you who have yet to give, please step forward as soon as you can and register your gift. I know that it will be deeply needed when spring and next fall come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ellsworth. And I'd like to go ahead and just emphasize that this pandemic, if you think about our last pandemic was in 1918. Our club has obviously survived a long time. We've done a lot for our community, and some people have done very well this year. If you look at your 401k or IRA and so forth, stock market is doing well, but there are a lot of members that have lost their jobs and so forth. So it's not exactly bad news across the board. Those that can, I really would encourage you to give what you can. We are a checkbook club, and we really need everybody's support. Again, the community grants annual campaign was renamed because all the funds that are raised stay in our community. And part of what we do is obviously connect, grow, and serve. And we are serving our community. So thank you for everything that you do. And I look forward to your participation in the fundraising. So thank you very much. And thank you, Ellsworth, for the progress that you've made. So as president, I get asked a lot of questions by members, and recently the Rotary magazine highlighted one of our fellowship groups. And so the question that came up was, hey, George, how do you get published in the Rotary magazine? I didn't know who to ask on that question. So obviously, we don't get that many articles published in it, being that it goes worldwide. So the question was, who do we ask? Who can answer appropriately that question? So we asked Moses Alstik, who had that article in the Rotary magazine, to give us a response to that question. Moses?
Hi, I'm Moses, dear leader of the Lou Harnett Society, our Scotch Whisky Fellowship group, where no election is ever rigged because there's just one registered voter. George asked me to talk to you about how on earth you could get published in Rotary magazine. If you saw the December issue, on the last page, the Lou Harnett Society of the Rotary Club of Madison is featured. And, well, quite frankly, what probably attracted them to our story is the fact that it's kind of a quirky story. It's a bit unusual, and it has everything to do with what Rotary is about. So if you're doing something that's quirky or that's unusual or that's unique, take a few pictures to make it interesting and perhaps bring it to life for people. Write a short article and shoot it off to Rotary magazine. Maybe they'll publish it, or maybe they'll send people to interview you as they did me. I heard that 2 people would be coming from Chicago to take pictures. I woke up at 4 a.m. The hair and makeup people started working on me right away. And by the time these folks were here in the afternoon, I found out that they were only interested in taking pictures of my bottles and not of me. Oh, well, close enough. But I know that over time, there have been some concerns that perhaps the Lou Harnett Society promotes drinking, and that is inappropriate. And I have to tell you that we absolutely do promote drinking. We promote also eating. We promote making great conversation. We don't have education about Scotch. We just hang out and make friends. And do we plan to continue to do that? Absolutely. And we'll feel terrible about it, though. The truth is, if you actually take a moment to read that article, you'll figure out exactly why Lou Harnett Society is important to our club and why it was important enough to Rotary International. Whiskey actually just brings us together. You find people of different genders, different ages, different races, sexual orientations, ethnic backgrounds, professions, who all come together because they're interested in Scotch. But Scotch is not what keeps us together. What keeps us together is the friends that we make, the bonds that we forge. That is what fellowship groups are about, and that is what Rotary is about. So let me give you one piece of advice. You shouldn't care about whether you get into Rotary magazine, but you should care about whether you're involved in a fellowship group or not. Not every Rotary club has them. This is a unique opportunity of our club, and it's absolutely a ton of fun. So if you haven't joined one, or if you joined one, you signed up for one, but you've never been active in one, I strongly recommend that you do it. A lot of them are still meeting via Zoom, and that still works okay, but soon they'll be meeting face to face again. It's important to just send an email to Jane today and ask for the list, or just ask to be added to one. If you're only going to add one, choose the Lou Harnett Society. But I hear that the other ones are pretty good too. So I hope to see you soon at one of our next meetings.
So we have birthday celebrate with a little humor and wisdom that complements Rotary's mission. So we also encourage members to make an age-appropriate gift to the Madison Rotary Foundation, rounded up to $100 for our Club Synergy Scholarship Fund. So on December 7th, Terry Taylor. December 7th, Jeff Tickner. December 8th, Kay Schwichtenberg. December 8th, Ken Yuska, who says, support my friends, donate to Musicians Relief at the Wisconsin Chamber Orchestra. December 11th, Charles McLymans, who shares a quote from the Dalai Lama, choose to be optimistic, it feels better. December 11th, Mary Rouse. December 12th, Jen Bauer. December 12th, Joe Maher. December 12th, Jen Savino. Thanks to our celebrants for their contribution to the Madison Rotary Foundation, and please join me in wishing them a happy birthday. Casey Okers will play Happy Birthday on the flute. So on to members in the news. So this week, my members in the news features Rich Lynch and Renee Moe. Now, they were quoted in an article about the first housing project that will come out of a new county fund for supporting the creation of apartments geared toward lower middle class renters. And that article appeared in the Wisconsin State Journal on November 13th. Now, Rich and Renee have a long history of involvement in our community. Rich is chairman of Findorf. He has been involved with Downtown Madison, Inc., the Greater Madison Chamber of Commerce, National W Club, United Way of Dane County, and the Madison Community Foundation. Now, Renee served as president of our Rotary Club during a centennial year, 2013-2014, and she is very active in our community as president and CEO of United Way of Dane County. Now, Rich chairs the Economic Stability Council, a local group that helped raise funds for the housing project. And he says the goal of the fund is to provide housing for working adults who make enough money that they don't need social services or other assistance, but still can't afford to live in Dane County. So this is a great example of providing a hand up. Renee says that thousands of our neighbors struggle to pay rent. The Economic Stability Council, the Madison Development Corporation, and the United Way of Dane County have partnered together to create the fund, and we look forward to hearing more about this project. It is completed. Now, other members in the news. Amanda White was quoted in an article about the Madison Public Market, which is scheduled to open in 2022. And that was Madison Magazine, December 2020 issue. Becky Steinhoff received this year's Joyce Erd Memorial Award presented by the board of the Capital Times Kids Fund, and she was featured in an article by Dave Zweifel. Plain Talk. Becky Steinhoff's service to Dane County youth has been extraordinary, and that's Capital Times 1120. Oscar Morales was interviewed about how funds raised for the annual Burby Derby helped provide a grant to Omega School to help move to virtual instruction. And that was NBC 15 News on 11/22. Masoud Akhtar's We Are Many United Against Hate is working with 2 local high schools to start chapters of this nonprofit group. And that was both on TV, WKOW on 11:25, and the Capital Times on 11:28. And Joe Luinis was quoted in an article about Wisconsin Chamber Orchestra's Winter Chamber Series online events. And that's Wisconsin State Journal, 11:25. And Jim Kruger was quoted in an article about feeding senior citizens in need and how they have created new contactless methods of delivering food, Wisconsin State Journal, 11/26. Again, these articles are just great examples of our fellow Rotarians and what they are doing in community. So if you wonder what kind of club we have, without a doubt, we have a club that plays a leadership role in the community, and that thanks to all the engagement of each and every one of our members. On a sadder note, I want to let members know that Mike Crane's dad, Bob Crane, passed away, so we extend our sympathies to Mike and to his family. And we held our monthly board meeting on Monday via Zoom, and I encourage members to review our board minutes on our member login tab in our club's website. Now, we want members to know who our current board members are and also get a chance to meet them in person. At least if not in person, at least you're seeing them virtually. That's as close as we can get during this pandemic. So we always ask each month one board member to introduce our speaker. And this month, Teresa Holmes will make the introduction. Now, Teresa is owner of Exponential Endeavors and is in her second year of a 2-year term on our club board of directors. She will now introduce our speaker. Teresa?
Good afternoon, Rotarians. Our speaker today is Professor Noah Williams, who is the founding director of the Center for Research on the Wisconsin Economy. Professor Williams is also a Juli Plant Grainger Professor of Economics at the UW-Madison, where he has been on faculty since 2008. He was previously on the faculty at Princeton University. He is a PhD and BA graduate of the University of Chicago and is a consultant to the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago and a member of the Economic Advisors Roundtable organized by the Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, and Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. Professor Williams has published widely and is co-author of several papers with Nobel Prize recipients Lars, Peter, Hansen, and Thomas Sargent. Today, Professor Williams will reflect on the state of the Wisconsin economy. We look forward to your presentation, Professor Williams, and we have made a contribution to the Rotary International Polio Plus Fund as a way to say thank you for speaking to us today. For those interested, Professor Williams will be available for Q&A immediately after today's meeting. You will find a link to the Q&A session on Zoom in this morning's email from the Rotary office. Rotarians, please help me welcome Professor Noah Williams to our virtual podium.
Hi, my name is Noah Williams. I'm a professor of economics at UW-Madison and director of the Center for Research on the Wisconsin Economy. Today I'm going to be talking to you about how has the economy, with particular focus on the economy here in Wisconsin, how have we fared during the COVID-19 pandemic, what was the magnitude of the initial lockdowns, the initial real economic calamity, which happened earlier in the spring with the onset of the pandemic, both the lockdowns and voluntary reductions in economic activity, and then how have we recovered since that time. We're going to talk about how there's been important shifts in the structure of the economy, how some sectors have fared the worst, while others have remained relatively strong. We'll also talk about how there's been a change in consumer behavior, how perhaps unsurprisingly, people have moved more of their purchases towards online activity, which has been happening for a number of years, but the pandemic really accelerated those trends. And we'll think about what does that mean potentially going forward. Throughout a lot of the discussion, I'm going to be focusing on where we've been. One of the natural questions is where we'll be going. What will the economy look like next year? But because of the dramatic change in the economy, a lot of the traditional relationships that we rely on for forecasting have really broken down over the past year. So as I mentioned, a lot of the forecasts have really been inaccurate, both during the lockdown period on the way down in economic activity and coming out. So I think it's useful to really focus on where we are now, and then I'll talk some about how can that inform our perspectives as to where we will be in the future, and also what perhaps will policy look like going forward as we have a new federal administration coming in. So again, it's going to be a lot on where we are, where we've been, with a little bit of looking forward. After you watch the recording, I will join for some live questions and answers. I'll be happy to take questions at that time. Just want to mention that on the slide there is the website crowe.wisc.edu, where we post regular updates. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is drawn from the regular updates and reports that we put out there. So I encourage you all to follow us there. And if you're interested in getting on our mailing list, you can drop us an email. The contact information is also on that website. So again, we're going to be focusing, largely on Wisconsin, but we'll also talk about some national factors. A lot of what we've seen is really, Wisconsin isn't necessarily a standout. I'll talk about some ways in which Wisconsin is different from what we've seen nationwide. So without further ado, let me then get into the discussion. So first, goes without saying that the economic crisis and the economic situation has really been driven by the course of the coronavirus. So what's shown here are hospitalization rates per million population in the United States, which is the black line, which goes up and down, has the two waves, and then the current rather steep wave at the end. along with several of the Midwestern states, Wisconsin there in red. Early on, we didn't see nearly as much virus activity here. This is just measured by hospitalizations, which is more or less an objective measure, not reliant on testing. But we see that starting, about the middle of September, we had, a very rapid increase, one of the more rapid increases around the country. But we've also seen what's shown there is Illinois and Minnesota, who have also seen dramatic increases, roughly the same time, Minnesota lagging slightly, but Illinois roughly rising in tandem with us. The data there is about a week or two old. We've seen a little bit of a reduction recently, but of course everybody is waiting to see what happens after we really see the fallout or potential fallout from Thanksgiving. So suffice it to say that the economic situation is really secondary to the virus situation. We're going to talk about some of the slowdowns which we've seen in economic activity recently, which is due to the increased virus spread and the associated public health restrictions which have been imposed in response to that virus spread. So now focusing just on, we're going to spend a fair bit of time talking about the labor market. So what's shown here are initial unemployment claims. So this is a proxy for layoffs. So it's people filing for unemployment insurance for the first time. And Wisconsin is in red, and that's the left scale. Nationwide is black, and that's the right scale. And you can see that they move roughly in tandem, starting in the middle of March as the pandemic took hold, and many lockdowns and restrictions on economic activity went into place. And again, people also voluntarily socially distanced and cut back on their own economic activity. We saw a huge spike in layoffs. Again, to give some sense of magnitude going into this, at the start of the year, there were roughly 96,000 people in total unemployed in Wisconsin. Within 1 week, in the peak week, we had 110,000 people file for unemployment for the first time. So the pool of unemployed workers roughly doubled or more than doubled within the span of a week. Unemployment claims came down after that initial high, but they remain elevated. And again, even though they've come down substantially since the early spring and throughout the summer, in recent weeks we've been running at about 15,000 new unemployment claims per week in the state, whereas at this point in time last year there were roughly 5,000. So again, unemployment has come down a lot, but still remains roughly 3 times the levels that we saw last year. So unemployment remains high. We're still in the recessionary situation, if not at the sort of depression or very severe economic contraction levels that we saw earlier in the spring. So that's just for initial claims. That's people filing for unemployment for the very first time. This graph is mislabeled. This is actually continued unemployment claims. So the top label there is wrong. The black one is fine. So these are continued unemployment claims. So this is the accumulation of those initial unemployment claims. And you can see that this is only insured unemployment. What's important is at the beginning of the period, at the beginning of the year, there were roughly twice as many people unemployed as claiming unemployment insurance, because not everyone who is unemployed is eligible for unemployment insurance. People who quit their jobs, people who didn't have a sufficient work history, people in fields and businesses which are not covered by the unemployment insurance system are not eligible. So typically unemployment runs significantly above insured unemployment. This is just insured unemployment, people who are eligible for unemployment insurance. Nonetheless, you can see that that number, rapidly increased from about 50,000 to over 300,000, by May. So as we had the initial unemployment claims coming in at an elevated level, that was accumulating into more and more people claiming unemployment insurance. We peaked out at this level in early May, and we've been falling dramatically since then. The most recent data, I just updated this, goes through the end of November, and we were down to about 80,000. So again, unemployment, has come down substantially, but still remains relatively elevated. Beginning of the year, we were under 50,000. At this point last year, unemployment was again under 50,000. So current levels are roughly 3 times what they were last year. So unemployment is still an important issue, is still a problem, even though it's not at the crisis levels that we saw throughout the spring and into the early summer. If we look at measuring unemployment rates, again, there's 2 measures here. Let me zoom in. The official unemployment rate, which is the red line, so that's the headline measure, which comes from surveying households, and the insured rate, which is blue, and that comes from these insured unemployment claims, like I've been talking about. And you can see that early on, at the beginning of the year, the early part of the picture, the official rate was roughly twice the insured rate. But then during the pandemic, part of the legislation, the response to the pandemic was to open up unemployment insurance, make it easier for people to claim unemployment insurance. And so we see the gap narrow, and then they've moved roughly in tandem throughout a lot of the period. So in particular, from about June onward, they've roughly tracked each other. We do note there, however, that the continued decline in unemployment was stopped. Most recently in the survey data. The official unemployment rate ticked up slightly in the state in October relative to September. So in September, we were down to 5.4% unemployment. We peaked out at 13.6 earlier in the year. So again, in April, so came down substantially, but then we ticked back up to 5.7 in October. So again, there's different ways of thinking about, measuring how far have we come, how far out of the hole have we gotten, right? So we went from 13.6 to 5.4, so we're maybe 2/3 of the way back to where we were before the pandemic hit. Different statistics give us different measures. All of them suggest we're more than halfway out of the hole, somewhere between 60% to 75%, depending on the measure. So we've come quite a long ways. Again, just basically closing businesses and then allowing them to reopen would generate a lot of economic activity. Since the summer, we've had a real switch in people's consumption behavior, in people going out to stores, what they purchase, how they make their purchases, which we'll talk about, and all of that has more lasting effects than just the shutdowns and reopenings. So those are just the official measures, but if we look at other measures of activity, unemployment looks even higher. So the blue there, so this is nationwide numbers, nationwide statistics, but it's a similar story for what's going on here in the state. The blue gives the regular state programs, which again, you can see have fallen off rather dramatically. But then we've had both extended benefits, which is the dark red, which allows for most states cut off unemployment benefits after 6 months. So you can see that as the pandemic has proceeded, as we've gone into the fall, some states or the federal government has introduced extended benefits, which have hit in some states, and that's the dark red line. In addition, the lighter red is the pandemic unemployment assistance program, which was part of the CARES Act, which was the initial federal response to the COVID pandemic, which allowed for many people with shorter work histories, gig workers, even some self-employed workers, to claim unemployment insurance where they were not eligible before. So enrollment in that program still remains high, even though it has come down. So if you look overall, at all measures of unemployment claims, we still are at a relatively high level. Unemployment still remains relatively severe. Moreover, one issue with the pandemic is it's been hard to even get a sense of how bad things were in April, because a lot of the statistics that we rely on just were not really designed for a period of such rapid change. So what's shown here are two different measures of job loss in the state. The red line is the survey unemployed, so just how many people are unemployed in the survey measure. And you can see that, again, that topped out around 300,000 in April, and has come down substantially. But if we look at year-over-year change, we're now looking at roughly 72,000 more people unemployed this year than last year. The payroll measure of unemployment, on the other hand, or employment loss, on the other hand, just measures, so that goes to a survey of firms where they just basically do a survey of firms and say how many people are on your payrolls. There were a lot of problems with the Bureau of Labor Statistics getting people who were temporarily laid off in, say, April and May to answer correctly that they were actually unemployed. The Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates that the true unemployment rate was perhaps a couple of percentage points higher than the official one, whereas firm payrolls are perhaps more of an objective measure. So what we see there is, measured by firm payrolls, job loss looks more severe. So we now have 72,000 more people unemployed this year than last year, as through October. But by firm payrolls, there's 205,000 fewer people on the firm payrolls. So firms are saying there's 205,000 fewer people employed. Households are reporting only 70,000 people more unemployed. So there's a real gap there. Again, there's often this gap, but it usually narrows over time. Part of the issue here is that in response to the pandemic, people losing their jobs, there's been a real rise in self-employment. So that's actually been one of the, if you like, one of the silver linings of all the stress and all the change that we've gone through, is that it's, for a long time, new business creation in the United States had been relatively flat. We've seen that really take off in the last couple of months. So there's more new businesses being created at this point in the year than there were in all of last year. All of 2019. So we've seen much more rapid pace of new business creation. And some of that is self-employment, and so it's people who are not on firm payrolls and now are still counted as employed. But some of the rest of that is surely just a discrepancy, some problems with the statistics as well. So all this is to say, we've come a long ways. We're, well off the dire situation where we were in earlier in the spring, but unemployment still remains, relatively high, and job loss remains high. Moreover, there's been significant wide variation in job loss by sector. So what's shown here are nationwide figures. Again, there's similar results in Wisconsin. There's a lot of lines on this graph, so just focus on a couple. If we look at the blue line, which is roughly in the middle, that measures all payroll employment. And through October, that number is down 6% year over year. In April, it was down 12%. Now it's down 6%, so roughly 50% of the way back. However, some industries and sectors have done better than others. What's shown there, what's most striking, is the red line at the bottom, which is the leisure and hospitality sector, which includes mostly restaurants and hotels. And you can see that in the midst of the pandemic in April, roughly 50% of all jobs in this sector were lost, meaning employment was 50% below where it had been the previous year. It's come back, significantly since then, but still remains roughly 20% down. So we've had, a big change in employment, a reduction in employment, but also a shift across sectors, right? The leisure and hospitality industry or sector remains relatively depressed, whereas other sectors on there, let me zoom back in, the green and the purple are manufacturing and retail. So retail, particularly grocery stores and big box retailers, have done well throughout the pandemic, and retail employment is only down about 3%. Manufacturing has also done well, and that's been a boon for Wisconsin because we remain a manufacturing heavy state. Our concentration of employment in manufacturing is roughly double that of the nation, and most manufacturers in the state, even if perhaps they cut back on production during the height of the pandemic, but many of them were able to remain in operation. So manufacturing employment is down about 4.5%. Again, overall employment down 6%, but nearly 20% in leisure and hospitality. So these industries, still face challenges for the near future. Of course, there's good news coming from the vaccine, and hopefully that will, have a relatively rapid rollout. But I would still expect for the near future, anything having to do with travel, tourism, or in particular full service restaurants, dining in, will face continued difficulties going forward. Looking at other measures, if we look at small business employment here in Wisconsin, there's two graphs here. Let's just focus on the one on the right, which is the food and drink sector. And what's shown there are different measures of employment, whether it's locations open, which is the purplish line, or just the number of employees or hours worked, which tend to move together. Again, you get a similar picture, big drop in March and April, relatively rapid recovery in May into June, then a flattening out. So this suggests both that this is same location changes. So this suggests roughly 10% of all businesses, this is from a private clients of a private company, which is Homebase, and this is their time card data. So this is mostly smaller businesses with at most 3 locations. So it's really kind of a measure of Main Street type businesses in the food and beverage sector, looking at the right panel in particular. And you can see here the roughly 10% of businesses that were open at the beginning of the year never reopened. So closure rate on the order of 10%. What we also see is that tailed off a little bit more as the virus spread picked up in the state in September. So many of these businesses remained open. We see the gap opening up between the lines there, but employment was cut back with the further restrictions on public health restrictions on indoor dining in particular. So this was really suggestive of the slowdown, which we did see in the October data in the state. And again, this wasn't unique to Wisconsin. If we look at dining in restaurants, as we've had the nationwide spike in coronavirus activity over the last couple of months, this has really fallen off. New York, Illinois, really across the country. So now I want to, in the remaining time, talk a little bit about how things have changed, and also let me talk a little bit about changes within the state. So this is a different measure of activity. One of the things which we've done in the center, CROWE, is throughout the pandemic, rather than relying solely on official government statistics, which are important and kind of the benchmark, but are often produced with a substantial lag, because so much was changing so rapidly, a number of private companies have made higher frequency data available. So this home-based data, which I just talked about, was one such source. What's shown here is a measure of foot traffic. So this comes from a company called SafeGraph, who tracks the location from people's cell phones. It's a relatively large sample, roughly 10% of the population. And then this data set just tracks visits to roughly 60 to 70,000 different commercial locations around the state. So what I've done here is look at year over year, or changes since the beginning of the year, since March, in Madison metro area, in Milwaukee, and in the rest of the state. And Madison is shown there in the red line. And you can see again the overall time patterns look similar across all of these. We saw a reduction of roughly 70% of all this measure of economic activity going out to commercial locations in April and May. A relatively rapid bounce back, but then things have flattened out really since about July. Again, this doesn't mean that growth has flattened out. We saw employment continued to come back. People were continuing to spend, but they just weren't making as many trips out to stores as they had been earlier on. And you can also see here that Madison has fared worse throughout the whole pandemic than the rest of the state. And this is largely due to the absence of students at UW-Madison in any appreciable degree. All right, so we are, in hybrid instruction right now, but a large number of our students remain off campus, and in many cases, particularly with graduate students, out of the country. So we're just not seeing the type of foot traffic in Madison that we see in the rest of the state, and certainly have a more substantial reduction relative to a year ago. So all of those are, measures of how the economy has slowed. But if we look at measures of spending, we see a much more rapid bounce back. So this is an aggregate measure of consumer spending. Again, this comes from a private data source, a company called Earnest Research. We see here much more of a so-called V-shaped recovery, with a very rapid reduction and very rapid increase coming in a relatively short period. And this measure of spending, which is really mirrored in the official measures of retail sales, is now up year over year. So we've more than recovered what we've lost, and we're up about 5% year over year in this total measure of spending. But how this spending has taken place has changed very dramatically. And in particular, what's shown here is the growth in online spending, which is on the top line, versus in-store sales, which is the bottom. Okay, so in-store sales again collapsed during the pandemic, and they've recovered, but still remain about 7% down. Online sales, there's been growth in online activity, a movement towards online purchases, which has been going on for a number of years now. But the pandemic really sped up those changes, and we saw a huge spike in online activity, online growth during the pandemic, and online sales remain high. So this is very important for thinking about the change in consumer activity and what would this mean long term. Right, so this means that a lot of spending, instead of taking place at smaller businesses, local retailers, is now being shifted towards Amazon in particular, but also Walmart, Target, the other large retailers with a significant online presence. So this has important implications for concentration and for the distribution of economic activity across different types of businesses, with a big shift towards online activity. Moreover, there's also been a big change, let me zoom in on this one, in what are people spending their money on. So this is change in consumption spending by a bunch of different categories. There's a lot of them here, so I won't go through all. I'll just go through a couple on the top and the bottom. The ones on the bottom are, not surprising, events and attractions. So this includes movies, concerts, theme parks. Spending on that is down about 70% year over year. Travel and transportation is down about 50%. And then even though retail has remained strong, department stores are down about 20%. So there's been more of a shift towards big box retailers and away from department stores and shopping malls. So those are all the areas which have been doing poorly. Where have we seen growth? We've seen growth in specialty food and beverage. The biggest component in specialty food and beverage is alcohol. So during the pandemic, there's been a lot of alcohol sales. But we also see groceries, more generally, home goods, and sporting goods. So overall, there's been a shift as people aren't going out to eat as often. So they're spending more on groceries. They're not traveling as much. They're spending more on home goods, refurbishing their home, instead of going on vacation, more on leisure time activities, boats, outdoor expenses, and so on, that they can be done more close to home. So all of that is, again, it's unclear how much of that will persist after the pandemic subsides, after the vaccines, plural, now get into to widespread use. But nonetheless, I would expect to see, a relatively significant shift in consumer attitudes for quite some time now. So that's kind of been a very quick or broad look as to where we've been. Now I want to talk a little bit about, looking forward as we're nearing 2021. Over the past month, we've had some good news on vaccines, and it looks like we'll have some initial rollouts within the next couple of weeks. But to have widespread rollout and distribution in a way that will have a substantial impact on economic activity will take a number of months, perhaps 6 months at least. So for the next 6 months, again, I would expect to see, a resumption of economic activity, but we've really seen a slowdown in the rate of growth relatively recently. We've kind of settled into this new normal, and the pandemic, as COVID-19 spread, has increased. Nonetheless, the overall picture is that during the lockdowns, the surprises were on the downside, meaning that the situation was often much worse than a lot of forecasters or people expected. But on the upside, during the recovery, most of the surprises have been on the upside, meaning there have been a lot of predictions that the growth would slow down, unemployment would start to increase, which haven't really borne out. We have seen a slowing of employment growth, but there were a lot of predictions about when some of the CARES Act funds ran out, the PPP program, the extended unemployment benefits, when those ran out, there was a lot of predictions that this would lead to mass unemployment, and we haven't seen that. We've seen continued slowing, but continued improvement in the labor market. So again, we've throughout this whole episode, we've really seen the resilience of the U.S. economy going through this period of very rapid change. If we think about economic policy, again, the CARES Act early on in March was important for supporting the recovery and supporting the recovery from the recession induced by the coronavirus. There hasn't been another package since then. There was, extended negotiations and deliberations, but nothing was done. And it looks like it's, there's been resumption of negotiations this week, but I still think it's relatively unlikely that anything major would happen before 2021. Moreover, going forward, it looks like we're going to have divided government, again, depending on the outcomes of the Georgia elections. That also means that the Democratic administration coming in had a lot of hopes for substantial stimulus. It's likely that we'll get something, if not by the end of the year, then early next year. But it wouldn't be as large as it would have been, perhaps, if we had a Democratic sweep. So overall, it looks like some additional stimulus is likely, but maybe not until January, and not on the scale that had been proposed, certainly with the House legislation earlier this summer. Overall, throughout all of this, market participants, if you look at the stock market, it's been much more optimistic than forecasters and academics. And again, so far, a lot of the surprises during the recovery have been on the upside. Earlier in the year, the Fed was predicting, in the summer, even they were predicting double-digit unemployment well into 2021. Unemployment is below 7% now and looks to fall perhaps even more. The next unemployment report will come out this week, so you will have seen it by the time you watch this video. So again, overall, we had a very severe economic recession. We've come out of it substantially, maybe 2/3 of the way, but we remain down, quite a ways, and there still remains quite a bit of recovery to be done. All right, that's all for my talk, and ran over perhaps just a little bit, but I look forward to talking with you or answering any questions on the in-person part.
Okay, so thank you very much for the presentation, Professor Williams. And right now, the Professor Williams' presentation took about 33 minutes. So it was very detailed, a lot of charts. So he's got a 1 o'clock class. So obviously we will not be able to have the Q&A. So just be aware of that. Now, when we were trying to set up the question and answer, I was able to ask him one question that I thought might come up. We usually have questions prepared beforehand, so he got a chance to give me that answer. And so the question that I asked him was related to, hey, how come the stock market is doing so well and you expect it to continue to do well? And I thought that it was really interesting. His perspective was that the stock market has done well and will probably continue to do well because of two things. One, the cost of money is unbelievably low, and the Fed has announced no changes to how much money is going to be increased, in terms of rate of money. So the cost to borrow is unbelievably low from the Fed. So that's one thing. There's no foreseeable change from the Fed on that. The second thing is that while we see a lot of small businesses are hurting, the majority of the businesses in the stock market are obviously large corporations, and large corporations are obviously benefiting significantly from what's going on. So whether it's Amazon.com, people ordering more online, whether it's Google, Facebook, Apple, a lot of technology companies doing, a lot of companies that are very large are comprise the stock market, and obviously they're going to continue to do very well as long as the pandemic lasts. So I thought that was pretty interesting. That was one question that was able to be answered. So with that, again, outstanding presentation, gives us food for thought for how the stock market is going to go for next year. And I want to thank everyone who attended today's meeting, and we are adjourned.